Sometimes the smallest act of kindness becomes the biggest turning point in someone's life. Years ago, an orphan boy caught stealing was shown mercy instead of punishment by a humble shopkeeper. What began as a moment of compassion would one day return, not just to repay a debt, but to rescue the very man who once changed a boy's world with a bowl of soup and a warm pair of socks. This is the story of how grace, once given, came back in the most unexpected and life-changing way. You're watching Storytelling and Beyond. If stories of kindness, emotion, and deep life lessons move you, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and support us in sharing tales that touch the soul. It was nearing midnight on a snowy winter evening in the quiet town of Brookstone. The streets were deserted, blanketed in fresh powder, and the wind howled low through empty alleyways. Most of the shops had long since closed, their windows dark and shuttered, save for one Whitaker's Grocery, a humble little corner store that still kept its light on, casting a soft golden hue onto the sidewalk like a silent invitation to the lonely. Inside, the air was warm, filled with the familiar scent of old wood, peppermints, and distant memories. Mr. Harold Whitaker, a gentle-faced man in his 70s, moved slowly behind the counter, wiping it down with a faded cloth. His hands were worn but steady, and his heart still held space for strangers. He didn't need to keep the store open late. The truth was, most nights no one came. But Harold had seen enough hard nights in his lifetime to know that sometimes, someone might just need a place that hasn't turned its lights off. Just as he was about to flip the closed sign, the bell above the door jingled faintly. He looked up. No one stood there. The cold wind swept into the store, but otherwise, silence. Then, from the shadows of aisle 3, came a rustle. Harold stepped out from behind the counter, careful and slow, and peered around the corner. That's when he saw him. A boy. Maybe 15. Lean, soaked from snow, hoodie clinging to his thin frame. His face was gaunt, eyes wide with fear, and in his hands, clutched like gold, a loaf of bread. Their eyes met. The boy froze, like a deer caught in headlights. "I didn't mean to steal," he said, voice cracking. I haven't eaten since yesterday morning." Harold didn't raise his voice. Didn't reach for the phone. Instead, he took a step back and spoke gently. "You don't have to steal, son. Put it down and come with me. You look like you need something more than bread." Confused, cautious, and clearly exhausted, the boy slowly returned the loaf to the shelf and followed the old man to the back room. The back of the shop was cozy and quiet. A space heater buzzed in the corner. An old armchair sagged by a small table cluttered with tea tins and mismatched mugs. Harold set a pot of soup on a burner, filled a kettle, and placed a folded towel, dry socks, and a clean flannel shirt nearby. The boy sat stiffly, too tired to run, too shocked to speak. "What's your name?" Harold asked, stirring the soup. "Jamie," the boy whispered. "Well, Jamie, you eat first. We'll talk after." The soup was hot and comforting. Jamie devoured it like he hadn't tasted food in weeks. When he was done, he looked up, eyes red, the walls of survival finally starting to crack. "I've been sleeping in a shed behind the train station," he muttered. "Got out of foster care 6 months ago. Been on the streets since." Harold nodded. Not in judgment. In understanding. "It's a tough world," he said. "But people forget you don't make it easier by being cruel." He handed Jamie a small envelope. Inside were 3 $5 bills. Jamie stared at it in disbelief. "Why are you helping me?" "I tried to steal from you." Harold gave a tired smile. "Because someone once helped me. When I was hungry, dirty, and scared. They didn't ask questions. They just helped." Jamie stood slowly, the envelope shaking in his hand. "I'll pay you back. Someday. I promise." "No rush," Harold said. "Just make sure you do the same for someone else when it's your turn." Jamie lingered at the door, then turned back. "I won't forget you." And just like that, he was gone into the night. But Harold knew that boy's story wasn't finished. And neither was his. Not by a long shot. The morning sun had barely stretched across the quiet rooftops of Brookstone when Harold Whittaker stepped out of his modest apartment above the grocery store. The snow from last night had softened into slush, making the sidewalks messy but walkable. He took his time, walking with his usual quiet grace, tipping his hat to the mailman, nodding at Mrs. Hendricks who was feeding birds on her porch. His joints ached more than usual, but his heart felt lighter. Something about that boy, Jamie, lingered in his mind. There had been something raw in those eyes. A hunger deeper than just food. Later that day, as Harold closed the shop for his midday break, he couldn't help but glance toward the train station 2 blocks down. Maybe just to see if Jamie was still around. Maybe to slip him another sandwich if he was lucky enough to find him. But Jamie was gone. Not a trace of the boy anywhere. The alley behind the station, the back of the shed Jamie had mentioned, it was empty, scattered only with footprints already washed away by melting snow. A quiet pang hit Harold's chest, not quite worry, but something like sorrow. He had hoped the boy might come back, even just to talk. But then again, people like Jamie were often like ghosts. Here one night, gone the next. Trust was hard to grow when the world had never given you a reason to plant it. Days passed. Then weeks. Winter slowly gave way to spring. Harold kept the memory of Jamie like a small ember in his heart, flickering, but never extinguished. It was nearly 10 years later when it happened. A cold April morning. Rain, not snow, this time. Harold was older now. Slower. He walked with a cane and didn't open the store much anymore. Just a few hours here and there to feel useful. The town had changed, too. Sleeker. More modern. A new coffee shop had opened across the street. Young people walked with earbuds in, more interested in screens than storefronts. That day, Harold stood behind the counter, quietly restocking a display of dried fruit when the sound of an engine, smooth, powerful, caught his ear. Outside, a black luxury car pulled up. Not the type you'd ever see in Brookstone. It gleamed even under the gray sky, tires gliding like it belonged in a different world. The driver, in a tailored coat, stepped out and walked briskly to the passenger door. He opened it, and out stepped a man in his mid-20s. Tall, poised, with sharp eyes and a familiar stillness. He wore a tailored charcoal suit, his shoes polished, his watch flashing gold as he adjusted his cuff. Harold squinted through the window. Something about the man stirred an old memory. The eyes. The man walked slowly into the store. Looked around like he was breathing in a piece of his childhood. Then their eyes met. "You don't remember me, do you?" he asked, a gentle smile forming. Harold blinked, his hand tightening around his cane. I think I might. Jamie?" The man nodded. The air changed. Jamie walked forward, his eyes glistening. "I've thought about you every day since that night. You didn't just feed me. You gave me dignity when I had none. That changed everything." Harold chuckled softly. "Well, looks like you did all right." Jamie laughed, the sound full of life. "More than all right. I built a company. Tech security. Moved west, then came back east to visit. But I had to come here first. I needed to see you. Thank you. Really thank you." Before Harold could respond, Jamie pulled something from his coat. An envelope. "I bought a place nearby, a small estate on the edge of town. And I want you to have it. It's yours now. With a caretaker. A garden. Room to breathe." Harold was speechless. "I won't take no," Jamie added, softly but firmly. "This is your return, Mr. Whittaker. For what you gave a boy who had nothing." For the first time in years, tears welled in Harold's eyes, not from pain or sorrow, but from something warmer than gratitude. "Jamie," he whispered. "You've become the man I always hoped you'd be." Jamie smiled again and reached for the old man's hand. "Because someone believed I could." Years passed in a way that only time knows how to do. Slowly, subtly, Harold's world began to shrink. The once vibrant grocery store, with its aisles of canned goods and shelves lined with colorful jars, now seemed more like a relic. The town had grown, and with it, people's habits had changed. The younger generation preferred the new supermarkets on the outskirts of Brookstone. Harold couldn't keep up with the demand for fresh stock, and the shelves gathered dust more than they did customers. But it wasn't the shop closing that weighed on Harold's heart, it was the silence of his old age. The quiet house above the shop. The empty space. The loneliness. The world had kept moving forward, and he felt like an old clock, ticking away unnoticed, waiting for his last hand to fall. And yet, there was one thing he never gave up, his hope. A flicker, always there, fueled by the memory of Jamie and the promise that the boy's kindness had paid forward. He held on to the thought that life had a way of balancing out, even if it took years to show. It was on one such quiet afternoon, when the rain came pelting down in sheets against the windows, that Harold's hope returned in a way he never expected. He'd been reading the newspaper, his eyesight failing but his determination strong, when a sound caught his attention, the bell of the store's front door. Harold's heart gave a quick flutter, his tired eyes squinting as he looked over the counter. The man who walked in wasn't Jamie. But the man was familiar. Very familiar. Mr. Whitaker? The voice was rich with authority and a warmth Harold hadn't heard in years. Harold blinked several times. Yes? The man stepped forward, his stride confident. It's me, Jamie. Jamie Larson. He said the name as if it was just another part of his business, as if it didn't carry the weight of a history Harold had long tucked into the past. Harold's breath caught. The boy, now a grown man, looked so different. The sharp suit, the slicked back hair, the confident posture, it was almost hard to believe this was the same hungry, desperate boy who had once stumbled into his store looking for a meal. But those eyes, those familiar, bright eyes, were the same. And as Harold looked into them, he saw more than just the years. He saw the compassion that had never left. Harold started, unsure of what to say. I didn't expect. Jamie, you've done well for yourself, haven't you? Jamie's smile grew a little wider, but there was something humbled about it. I did. But not without the things you gave me. I always remembered that night. Always. Jamie stepped closer to the counter, his hands held loosely in front of him. You've always helped people, Mr. Whitaker. Even when you didn't have much. You were never the type to turn away anyone. I want to give you something back. What you gave me. I owe it to you. Harold felt his pulse quicken. The shock of seeing Jamie, of hearing those words, his heart softened with the weight of them. I never expected repayment. I just did what was right. Jamie shook his head, his smile fading into something more serious. You taught me something I'll never forget. That kindness has its way of returning. You may not think it's much, but it meant everything to me. Harold reached out, a shaky hand going to his own chest. I did it for you because I saw a boy who had nowhere to turn. But look at you now. You've made a name for yourself. Jamie's eyes softened as he took a step back. And now, I want to make sure you never have to worry again. With that, Jamie pulled out a small folder from inside his jacket. He slid it across the counter to Harold, who looked down at it, confused. What's this? Jamie's eyes met his again, but this time there was a subtle seriousness in them. It's a deed. The house you're living in, it's yours, free and clear. And the lands surrounding it. A little gift from me to you, Mr. Whitaker. I never forgot what you did for me. You taught me to give back, and now it's my turn. Harold stood there for a moment, his mouth slightly agape. He'd spent his life giving, asking for nothing in return, never expecting a thing. But now, Jamie had taken the very lesson he had taught him and turned it into something far greater. I don't know what to say, Harold finally whispered. Jamie smiled. You don't have to say anything. Just live the life you deserve. You've earned it. Harold's hands trembled as he took the deed. His mind raced, trying to process the enormity of it. But all he could feel, all he could understand, was the truth in Jamie's words. kindness had indeed come full circle. And for the first time in years, Harold felt a weight lift off his shoulders, like the world had balanced out, the scales tipping in his favor after all these years. It had been 6 months since Jamie had transferred the deed and the property into Harold's name. The old man's life had changed in ways he hadn't thought possible. The house Jamie gifted him wasn't just a roof and walls, it was a sanctuary. It had a sprawling garden where Harold planted tomatoes and tulips, a cozy reading room with a fireplace, and even a caretaker named Eliza who stopped by each morning with fresh bread and warm tea. Harold's eyes were brighter. His shoulders, once hunched by years of work and solitude, now sat square with renewed purpose. He no longer felt like time was closing in around him, he felt like life had restarted. But it wasn't just Harold's story that was quietly unfolding. Somewhere in the city, another man's story was falling apart, brick by brick. Daniel Larson, Jamie's childhood friend and Harold's estranged son, was drowning in the consequences of his own choices. Jealousy had crept into his heart early on, planting seeds the day Jamie had first entered their home as a struggling orphan. Daniel couldn't stand the way his father treated Jamie like a son. He masked his bitterness for years, growing up beside Jamie, pretending to be a brother, while inside he harbored resentment for every shared meal, every compliment, every time Jamie succeeded. When Harold had grown old and Daniel came of age, he convinced his father to sign over all the family property and accounts to him, using the pretense of handling responsibilities. Once the papers were signed, he sent Harold away under the guise of downsizing and taking better care of him. In truth, he simply didn't want his father's presence around. But betrayal breeds betrayal. Daniel had married Vanessa, a woman as ambitious as she was charming. At first, she played the part of the loving wife. But behind the scenes, she manipulated Daniel into signing joint ownership of every asset they held. By the time he realized her intentions, it was too late. Vanessa had quietly transferred everything to her name, leaving Daniel with nothing but the cold echo of his own misdeeds. The day Daniel walked in on her with another man in their living room was the day his world shattered. There was no screaming. No pleading. Vanessa looked him dead in the eye and said, "You never earned any of it, Daniel. You just inherited it. And now, it's gone." Daniel left the house with nothing but a duffel bag and a phone low on battery. He wandered through the city for days, sleeping in his car, pride stripped bare, his future unclear. His calls to old friends went unanswered. There were no shoulders left to lean on. He was alone. One rainy evening, with nowhere to go, Daniel found himself walking the same sidewalk his father had taken every day years ago. His clothes were soaked, his shoes falling apart, and the weight of his choices pressed against his chest like a stone. As he stumbled toward the outskirts of Brookstone, a black car slowed down beside him. He didn't look up until he heard the familiar hum of the engine. The window rolled down. "Daniel?" He froze. Jamie stepped out of the car, holding an umbrella, his face filled with cautious surprise. "Is that really you?" Daniel's voice cracked. I've got nothing left." Jamie was quiet for a moment. Then he stepped closer and looked Daniel in the eyes, not with resentment, not with satisfaction, but with the same kindness Harold once showed him. "I know someone who would want to see you," Jamie said gently. "Come on. Let's get you warm first." Daniel sat in stunned silence as the car pulled away from the curb, carrying him toward the same farmhouse Harold now called home. He didn't speak much on the ride, too ashamed, too confused. But in his heart, something stirred, something that had long been buried beneath jealousy and pride. When they arrived, Harold opened the door himself. For a moment, he just stood there, looking at his son, drenched and broken. "I've been waiting for this moment," he said softly. Not out of anger, but hope. Daniel broke down. That night, father and son sat under a warm lamp, sipping tea, the quiet between them filled with understanding. Redemption wasn't easy. But sometimes, it started with a simple return. If this story moved you, don't forget to subscribe to Storytelling and Beyond for more heart-touching journeys of redemption, kindness, and hope.